Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. Today we have an exclusive interview with Ben Jacobs, a very, very good journalist that has been great throughout this takeover. And we've got a takeover update for you today. So Ben, thank you for coming on the channel.
Good afternoon. I'm a little bit scared, by the way, because in your top left, all I see is 666. And that, of course, is the number of the devil. And I think Manchester United fans will feel that they've still got devils in charge, but maybe not for much longer. It's a big week for the takeover, that's for sure.
Exactly, a massive week. And honestly, now you've just pointed that out, I'm thinking, is that a bad sign? Is that a good sign? I don't know. Anyway,
Can we just get one more, just for my own peace of mind?
Exactly. We'll get straight into things anyway. And I just wanted to start off straight off the bat. I mean, yesterday you put a lot of news out, which I think was quite exciting for Manchester United fans. Anything regarding the takeover at the moment is quite exciting because I think most Man United fans, if not all, just want this to be complete and finalised. It feels like it's been going on for quite a long time. But you reported that neither group will be going into a period of exclusivity this week, but then obviously contrasting reports are coming out saying there will be a preferred bidder announced this week. Can you tell us if there is or there isn't going to be a group that is announced to be the new owners of Manchester United this week?
Well, I don't think what I put out is bad news. The point is a preferred bidder would come earlier in the process. And both groups, Sheikh Jassim and Ineos, have been undertaking tasks traditionally associated with a preferred bidder already. And as a consequence, they are being asked to get themselves to the brink. And if the Glazers green light either, they'll be in a position to sign and proceed. So preferred bidder is a bit of a media construct at this point. Earlier in the process, and even really last week, it was very possible if a group was selected, they would be almost anointed with that title of preferred bidder, and then they would proceed to get to the point of signature. And when you're the preferred bidder in a more traditional takeover, it would entail various things such as due diligence, final negotiation, and so on. But my understanding is that no exclusivity will be offered, which creates maximum competitive tension. And the other reason as well is that both groups, since April the 28th, which was supposedly the final offers, but obviously since then, Sheikh Jassim has made 2 further bids. And every single bid since April the 28th, including from minority investors, even though they were not bound by that deadline, is what's known in takeover terms as executionable. And because it's executionable, if there is an agreement on price and the Glazers wish to proceed, there's not necessarily any need to have a preferred bidder stage. So we just need to be very careful with terms, because I know that what I put out there, some people are asking for clarification on. Preferred bidder is not a term to get obsessed about. Right now, we're at the stage of winner. And I understand that it's very easy to say, isn't preferred bidder winner? But in a legal sense and a takeover sense, they're very different. Preferred bidder stage would see one group head into exclusivity and continue final negotiation. If there was a preferred bidder and they did not have exclusivity, it's largely irrelevant, which is effectively what has been happening over the course of the last few weeks. First of all, it was supposedly Qatar in the lead, and then Jim Ratcliffe's offer was revealed to be higher, and everybody has been reporting correctly that that is advancing with positive and ongoing talks. Suddenly, because there's no exclusive period, Sheikh Jassim can come back in and make another offer, and the dynamic changes again. So preferred bidder means nothing without exclusivity. And there will not, to my understanding, be exclusivity. The next step is going to jump in likelihood to an actual winner. And then from there, it will be a period of completion, which will differ in timescale depending on which group wins. Because with Sheikh Jassim, the group not only have to complete the acquisition with the Glazers for their 69% of shares, but they have to delist the rest as well to get to 100%. So there is a slightly different process after the Glazers commit to one of the two groups. But the point I'm making, which I actually think is positive, is there won't be an extra preferred bidder stage. We're jumping from what I understand to a winner and to completion. Now, if there is a, in inverted commas, winner, the group could logically ask for some kind of very short exclusivity simply to transfer the funds, which would be different to the exclusivity usually connected to a preferred bidder. But because after you've signed, it's binding, again, exclusivity becomes relatively irrelevant in that scenario. And the reason for that is because after any group agrees something with the Glazers, there'll be break clauses and there'll be a massive fee if the Glazers are to in any way jump out of the process. So I think what we're looking at in the next week or two is effectively the entire process coming to a close, not just the next step of a preferred bidder.
Yeah, I mean, I think that cleared a lot up for a lot of people, because even myself, when I was reading that last night, I was like, oh, this is just going to keep going on and on and on. But I understand the fact that basically all of them, all the parties that are involved are at the final stage that an exclusive bidder would be at. So the next step is just to obviously announce a winner, like you said. And you said this week's a really important week. Is this a week that we could get that announced potentially?
Certainly from the group's perspective, I understand that the 9-2 Foundation have directly intimated to those running the sale, Rain Group, and also to the Glazers in their meeting with them, that they want this done. They want an answer by when the transfer window opens. And there's a real fear on the Qatar side in particular that the asset is being damaged. And who knows what will happen as far as the enterprise value of the club if the window opens and there's still no clarity. And the worry from 9-2 Foundation is that there's a lot of work to be done. So they're not thinking about only a transaction with the Glazers. They are well aware that if they're to come in, they have to get moving quickly. So there's clarity in the transfer markets. There's clarity on the stock market to an extent. Obviously, if they acquire it, they'll take the club off the stock market. But when talking about valuations, if it drags on and the enterprise value continues to go down, it still damages the very asset that the Glazers are trying to sell. So they want to get a move on as quick as possible, because in theory, and we have to wait and see just how far advanced the groups are in terms of the box ticks, but there's the Premier League owners and directors test, there's the satisfaction of UEFA, there's the actual transfer of funds. That doesn't take long, but it comes last in the process and can still be 2 or 3 days before you technically have the keys to the football club. And then on top of all of that, there's obviously anything early in the transfer window that might be potentially delayed, or there may be a difference of opinion between the current recruitment team and somebody that Qatar in particular want to bring in. So Qatar have got their own football experts in mind. Of course, until you're in, you're never going to say that someone's a replacement for an existing member of Manchester United staff. But quite clearly, the difference between the Ratcliffe bid and the Jassim bid is that Ratcliffe's got football experts, because Ineos have already done football. And we know that Sir Dave Brailsford is leading that broader charge to find the right figures if they come into Manchester United. Whereas on the Jassim side, it's predominantly intermediaries and bankers. So they're going to have to find some football experts, and they're going to have to assess the club and work out who's staying and who's going from the senior leadership team. And much like Chelsea, you would never say to someone before you come in, we're definitely replacing. So there's a grey area at this point, and they will likely carry out a 100-day review if they're successful before then determining who will stay and who will go at Manchester United. So there's real urgency on the side of Qatar. They've been pushing for quite some time and saying that we want an answer and before the window opens. And then from the selling side, to an extent, it will take as long as it takes. But once both groups are in a position where they're not budging on the financials and the structure of Ratcliffe's flexible offer is clear, then the Glazers just have to make their mind up. And there is a real feeling that we may get news this week.
So, I mean, that's really exciting what you've just said there, because I think a lot of fans do think that the club needs a shake-up, and they do need, different people in certain positions. So the fact that Qatar are really pushing for that to happen is obviously exciting to a lot of the fans. But as you say, that they really obviously want this to go through quickly. They ideally wanted it to happen before the transfer window opens. For me, that seems quite unlikely, considering the transfer window, I mean, it's not technically open yet, but it's basically nearly open now. If this does get the green light, do you think Qatar will just start moving straight away in terms of the transfer window and trying to get deals across the line? Do you think that's what's kind of holding things off for Man United right now?
Not necessarily. First of all, there is a winner, and then there is the box ticks, if you like, to complete the process. And the second aspect, after you've won and have signed, can still take some time, especially because Qatar don't just have to complete this process, which is only for 69% of the Glazers shares. They have to proceed and delist the rest to get 100% of the club. But that won't necessarily create a delay. I think the point from Qatar's perspective is really very simple, that the longer this drags on, the more the asset they're trying to buy is damaged. So as soon as we get, in inverted commas, a winner, whether the funds are transferred and the keys are handed over, as soon as we get a clear winner and the announcement that would come with that, then the market will settle and be aware, if it's Qatar, that it's going to be delisted, and then plans can start. Manchester United are hampered more by financial fair play, and qualifying for the Champions League helps a little bit. So no new owner is going to be able to come in and significantly change the recruitment strategy in one window, not from a budgetary point of view. So I don't think that Manchester United will be significantly altered or hampered in terms of the delay of the owners coming in for earlier targets. But I think that everyone at the football club needs a strategy. They need to understand what's going to be happening within the recruitment team of the club and who either Qatar or Ineos might bring in. So there's almost two aspects to this. One is, what have Manchester United planned and what can they get done early? And my understanding is, regardless of ownership, there's something in the region of 100 million, and Manchester United want to get 2 signings done early. And those will happen under the Glazers or under new owners, unless the new owners come in first and say, actually, we've got different ideas in mind. But that would be very foolish, because they're going to have to respect Erik ten Hag and the recruitment strategy that's already in place. So that's one aspect. And this is why Manchester United are going to be really firm over Mason Mount, because you've got 100 million to spend and you want 2 players. Mount at 50-55 might enable you to bring in Kim, for example, or Højlund. Whereas if Mount is 75, it's 3/4 of that budget. And then suddenly it's very difficult to find another target and early in the window. But in the long term, the challenge of this uncertainty is just Manchester United will need more than just 2. They'll need a proven goal scorer, and that may require a much higher outlay on top of the budget that I've just mentioned. Then we have to factor in the outgoings and any contract renewals that either are ongoing or still to be initiated. And if things drag on, there's the window of uncertainty. So if, for example, you're Marcus Rashford, everyone's in agreement. The Glazers, Ineos, Ratcliffe, and those 3 clearly feel he will stay and want him to renew. But if another 6 weeks passes and somebody comes in for Rashford and he doesn't even know who the owners of the football club are going to be, then it creates uncertainty. I certainly wouldn't paint that as Rashford's going anywhere, because I think that Manchester United are very confident they'll be able to keep hold of the player. But this is just the nagging doubt at the back of the group's mind. If they can't get in right at the beginning of the window or as close as possible, then they put themselves in a very difficult position in terms of their transition into the football club, both on and off the field.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, to be honest with you. I think it does need to happen sooner rather than later. I mean, the fans are frustrated. I can't imagine how the people that, the groups that are dealing with this, how frustrated it is becoming. But it'll be interesting to see if we do get an update this week. Hopefully we do. But while we wrap up the ownership situation, I just wanted to ask you, to your knowledge, obviously you might not have inside information on this. I just wanted to ask you, just in case you might have some sort of idea. Do you think the Glazers are looking to stay with a stake of Manchester United? Do you think they want to complete the full sale? Because obviously there was talks of Joel and Avram wanting to stay with a stake, but the rest of the family wanting to just get out and take the money from that. Where do you think their preference lies?
I think it's all about money. I don't think it's about the Glazers staying or going. And even if the Glazers stay, why are they staying? Because 2 of them, at least Joel and Avram, think they can make more money. So my understanding has been the same throughout the process. If the right valuation is hit, then all 6 Glazers will leave, which is why there's a more positive mood now in the camp of Sheikh Jassim. What Ratcliffe's done is tried to avoid a head-to-head with Jassim, and even Qatar speak about the 2 bids as being like apples and pears. One is flexible for control and gives the Glazers an option to stay. But make no mistake, Ratcliffe would also buy all 69% of the Glazers' shares if that's what they choose to do. And then you've got Qatar that are adamant it's a cash-free, debt-free bid for 100% of the club. And the most telling thing in all of this is really the fact that amidst the stories that I actually revealed back in February about Nasser Al-Khelaifi being involved and being a consultant, and everyone got caught up in that because of the state ownership aspect, because Nasser Al-Khelaifi's QSI and QIA. But the second meeting was instigated by the Glazers. So if all 6 Glazers don't want to sell, then why are they instigating a meeting with Nasser Al-Khelaifi to try and get Qatar to up their bid? So whether they stay or go, this is about money. It's not about sentiment and wanting to stay at the club. It's not about an attachment to Manchester United. This is about getting bang for their buck. And therefore, if the Qatar offer is high enough, all 6 Glazers will sell. And if the Qatar offer isn't high enough, or 2 of the 6 Glazers feel like when they eventually exit in a laddered manner, they're going to get more by hanging around, then they'll pick Ratcliffe. And the truth is, we as journalists can tell you all of the sides and the context and the permutation, but the Glazers haven't indicated yet to either side if all 6 are going to go or whether 4 are going to go and 2 are going to stay. But what has been indicated by multiple sources on the seller side, within the football club and from the groups, is that if that magic number is hit or close to, then they are determined sellers. And this again is why Qatar are confident, because Qatar have had a really difficult bidding process. They haven't got the best relationship with Rain Group. They've used intermediaries. There's been all kinds of fallouts. There's been a big media push to try and put pressure on the Glazers. There's been dispute over their numbers and whether the pledged investment is on top or included, and also whether the club valuation is minus the debt or with the debt cleared on top. And amongst all of that, they're still there. And again, a lot of people think that that is telling as well. But coming back to what I said before, because there's no period of exclusivity at this point, and because, as I reported yesterday, there's unlikely to be a preferred bidder stage and jumping straight to a winner, both groups can feel like they're going to win, because both groups are doing things that are so advanced, you wouldn't normally be doing them unless you're about to sign a deal to complete a takeover. But only one, if one is picked, is going to be able to get into that position. And this is why the Glazers have somehow, astonishingly, frustratingly, been able to manufacture this entire process exactly how they want without giving anything away, which is highly frustrating for Manchester United fans, but that is the reality of where we're at the current point.
Yeah, I mean, it's typical from the Glazers, isn't it? I mean, we're used to their kind of behaviour, and honestly, like you said, it is all about money for them. But obviously, you don't have to answer this question, but I want to ask you, because on Twitter, there has been a lot of people talking, and obviously it could just be rumours at this point, that they feel like Qatar is now in the lead and is the most likely group to win this race. How do you see this playing out, just from what you know?
I think Qatar are still there, and that is telling. I've said that many times, but as journalists, we have to be responsible. Somebody in their bedroom with an MUFC 12345 handle, or somebody in Qatar with the same handle in Arabic, can say what they want, and you've got probably a 50% chance of being right. But we should also point out there's minority investors, there's financiers, and there's no sale that are technically, if we outline all of the options, possibilities. But in essence, it would be very unlikely this is going to end with nothing. So given that the 2 groups, Sheikh Jassim and Ineos, are the ones advancing things, it feels like one or the other. So take a guess if you're in your bedroom, because you've got a 50% chance of being right and getting the Twitter exclusive. But journalists have to be responsible, and we must outline the permutations. And it's not about being first, it's about being right. So I wouldn't want to sell anybody a false dream. I wouldn't want to promote who I think might be the winner, and then it gets ultimately aggregated and people start to either celebrate or criticize, depending on whether they're happy or sad by the outcome. The reality of the situation as of last night, both groups, because I've spoken to sources, Qatar are more positive, but they still know the Glazers have not communicated anything to them. So there's definitely more momentum behind the Qatar side. With Ratcliffe, nothing has moved. They said last week it was 1 to 2 weeks away from their perspective of progress or further news. And Ratcliffe is playing the process as well. That's really important to note, because with Chelsea, he came in rogue at the last minute and he made a bid outside of the process. And that sale was also handled by Rain Group. So Ratcliffe's had to be really conscious to not make as much of a media storm, to do everything by the book. And this is why Ineos are more silent in the media, if you like, comparative to Sheikh Jassim. And that cautious optimism hasn't changed, because there's still these ongoing and positive talks. So as journalists, we have to point out both groups are on the brink. Both groups are in deep, deep talks. And is there an indication yet from sources of who they're going to pick? Genuinely no. And I wouldn't want to come on here and tell you it's definitely one or definitely the other. Is that going to change in the next 48 hours or the next week or so? In all likelihood, yes. So what we should be reporting is that the process is coming to a conclusion. And I understand that people will be listening and say, well, what have I learned by that? I knew the 2 options, but journalists shouldn't be mind readers. Journalists can't dig ahead of the process. So if Sheikh Jassim and Sir Jim Ratcliffe do not know yet if they've won or lost, They only know that if they've won, they can sign very quickly. If that's all they know at this point, then unfortunately, that's all we can report.
Well, what does excite me a little bit here, and I completely respect that, and that's why we have you on the channel, because we know how reputable of a journalist that you are. But what I got excited about from that was the fact that Qatar are confident, because I mean it's no secret to anyone in this channel. For me personally, I prefer the Qatari bid, and I prefer what comes with that for Manchester United. So the fact that they're confident seems like a good sign, but as you said, it could go either way. But the one good thing to take away is once it actually is finally announced, it should actually be a quick process from there. I mean, you can never say never with the Glazers, but it should move pretty quickly considering how slow this whole process has been drawn out. But lastly, on the ownership situation, I just wanted to ask you, is Erik ten Hag frustrated with this? Is he wanting to have this kind of boxed off going into the summer window?
I think everyone at Manchester United is frustrated. It's strange because takeovers take time, and this, from start to finish, believe it or not, will still be quick compared to your standard takeover. I always say the same thing. A takeover is like having a baby. It takes 9 months, and we're about 8 months in at the moment. So it's not overdue, to use a pregnancy metaphor. But the reason why it feels annoyingly slow is because it's been so public. So we've heard that there's deadline for indicative offers. Then, of course, there was the second round of bidding. Then there was the extra stage, the third round of bidding. And there's been this constant momentum on public platforms suggesting it's getting closer and closer and closer. But I always felt, and I reported it, that Easter notion of it being completed was optimistic. So I think that from Erik ten Hag's point of view, and others at the club, by the way, as well, it's not just on the football side, the frustration is down to the fact that they've been told the same things, that they'll get clarity at the end of the season. And now we're beyond the end of the season, and it's the beginning of the transfer window almost. So Ten Hag clearly wants to know what's going on, but for different reasons, actually, to other executives at the football club. His interest in clarity is because he's well aware that a new owner may have different ideas on the football side. They may bring in a sporting director. They may change executives. They may have different budgets in mind, but still within quite a tight financial fair play cycle. So no one's communicated to Erik ten Hag. It's not like Sheikh Jassim, who's not been on the phone to anybody, by the way, throughout this process in terms of Rain Group or the Glazers. It's intermediaries. It's people like Nasser Al-Khalifi, but it's not like anyone from the groups, same for Jim Ratcliffe, has spoken to Erik ten Hag. So he's in the dark in terms of what kind of structure could come into the club, what kind of budget could come into the club, how quickly might they get in. And that's another factor that, yes, a winner now should be relatively quick if one is picked. But after that, the actual process to get to either 100% of the club or control of the club is slightly different for each party. So I think that Ten Hag won't want another overshadowing. Because remember, when he first came in, he was overshadowed for months by Cristiano Ronaldo, and that made pre-season difficult. Now he's entering into another preseason. The last thing that he will want is to sit down at every single press conference and be asked again and again and again about the ownership situation. So it's absolutely true that he's frustrated. It's absolutely true that the groups are frustrated as well. And this is the reality of the urgency of getting clarity when a window opens. Otherwise, like I said before, a transition is really difficult. Look at Chelsea, for example. They managed to get in at the end of May, and they did have time when the window opened before pre-season. They took 100 days to review things. They changed their board. Todd Boehly became chairman and sporting director. They spent 300 million that window, and it was chaos. And it was chaos because they moved so fast that despite the ambition, it was almost impossible to actually implement new ownership at a football club and manage a window. Now, Manchester United are better equipped because it's unlikely that a series of senior figures will all exit within the first 50 or 100 days, but it's still a similar kind of scenario. It'll be a completely different ownership model. So the sooner you get in and calm things down and put a clear structure in place, the better. Because if this drags on, if this takes time, if there is upheaval within Manchester United Football Club like at Chelsea, then eventually it's going to have an impact on the football field as well, which is exactly what Erik ten Hag is trying to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting insight, especially coming from the manager's point of view and what's going to happen. You can understand the frustration on all parties. But let's move on to a few transfer bits because obviously, summer transfer window, the fans are excited. We know that this window has to be a good one. And the first name I'm going to bring up is, of course, Mason Mount. News coming out. It feels like Mason Mount is, at the moment, probably one of the most nailed on transfers that could happen. Not saying it is nailed on, but it seems probably the person that we're most linked to. Today, I think it was Sky that was saying that a bid for Mason Mount is imminent, but there's still a in between when it comes to the valuations. Obviously, I think Chelsea want 80, we want to go 50. What is the update surrounding Mason Mount and how likely is it that he joins Man United as an early signing? Like you said, we want to make some early signings in the window.
I think there's a high probability that Mason Mount will leave Chelsea, and Manchester United are confident because they know the player is leaning towards Old Trafford. It's all just going to come down to fee. So Mauricio Pochettino and Chelsea would love to keep Mount, but as yet, they haven't got any positive indication that Mount will sign. And Chelsea had to pivot from offering Mount a long-term deal to, in February, trying to get him to extend by an extra year. And the reason for that was to buy time, which again is an indication that Mount hasn't given Chelsea too much to cling to in terms of keeping him at this point. And unlike Daniel Levy and Harry Kane, which we might come on to, whereby Levy might just allow Kane's contract to run down in the hope that he kind of falls in love with the project, I think if Mount indicates to Chelsea he wants to leave, they will look for a fee. So this is going to all come down to money from Manchester United's point of view. Chelsea value Mason Mount at 70 to 75 million. And as I revealed a few weeks ago, there's a 15 to 20 million gulf in valuation between Manchester United and Chelsea. Manchester United want Mount for under 60 million and actually closer to 50 million if they can possibly get him. And one of the reasons for that is because what I said before, that they want to try and bring in at least 2 early players for a collective budget of around 100 million. So I expect Manchester United to bid. I expect that bid to be much lower than Chelsea are looking for. And I expect Manchester United to stick to their guns on this. I don't see any scenario where they meet Chelsea's valuation. But sources on the Chelsea side indicate that if Mount, after a formal offer comes in, says to Chelsea, I'm not going to sign and I want to leave, Chelsea may settle for something a little bit less. And this is where James Maddison comes in, who's loosely on Manchester United's radar, even though, as I've revealed, for about 6 months, Newcastle are pushing and the player's quite keen on that move. And also Spurs are one to watch. But if you're Manchester United, you absolutely look at the Maddison fee, which is likely to be around 40 million. And you say, how can you be asking for double Maddison when Mason Mount has got so little time left on his contract? And you've got almost a little bit of leverage there. Or, of course, if Mount doesn't come off, you've got another option. So Manchester United would be quite smart to kind of be across both of them, because then you can use the Maddison number to try and also get the Mount fee down. So Manchester United are certainly of the belief that it won't be 70 to 75 million. But if it's above 60 million, they'll walk away from the deal. If it drops below 60 million, they're confident of getting it done.
Well, that's really, really interesting because I'm a fan of Mason Mount. A lot of people on this channel aren't. He kind of does get mixed reviews, but I'm a fan of him. And like you said there, I mean, 80 million is ridiculous with the year left on his contract. And I do think that, obviously, this is just my opinion, I do think Chelsea will come lower, especially with Mount wanting to leave, because he could just go on a free next year and then you get absolutely nothing for him. And obviously there's no guarantees he's going to play next year either with all the players they have. So yeah, I mean, we'll be looking forward to the Mason Mount saga. Hopefully it's one that doesn't drag out, but everything with Man United seems to go that way. But thank you for the update on that, and Maddison as well. Really, really interesting. Now, like you said, talking about Harry Kane and Daniel Levy, we have not heard much about this in a few days, actually, which seems like a long time in a transfer window. But we've heard that Harry Kane is Man United's main priority. Daniel Levy is obviously a really tough person to negotiate with. And you've just said, with financial fair play and the budget, I mean, it's impossible to pay like over 100 million for Harry Kane. What is the situation on him and Daniel Levy with Manchester United at the moment?
Well, Manchester United went to the player side to understand whether or not he would be open to a move, but also be prepared to force a move if necessary. And they don't want their time wasted because, first of all, if it drags on throughout the summer, you almost get another Frankie de Jong situation like last summer. And second of all, it's such a big outlay that if you withhold that budget, hoping it's going to get done and working on it, then you can't turn your attention to other targets. This is ultimately why Liverpool say they pulled out of the Bellingham deal, because they had a low confidence that it would be ended quickly, and they felt like the overall package was going to be too high. So Manchester United wouldn't be wasting their time on Kane if they couldn't find that money. That's the first thing to say. So when people say Manchester United's maximum budget is somehow only 100 million, it's inaccurate to my understanding, because it's how you structure the deal. So don't read too much into collective spend over the summer. It's not really about that. It's what numbers you put on your financial cycles. And I think that amortization, which Chelsea fans have learnt about, is often forgotten. So if you sign Kane for 100 million on a 5-year contract, then you can divide the transfer fee by 5, which puts it over 2 financial fair play cycles. And that approach means that your outlay on this summer's books is not 100 million. So it's not really about the collective spend for Manchester United, which is why I never guess at summer budgets collectively. It's more about what can they spend now, how can they keep within financial play, and what can they put on the books in future cycles. And when you have a big outlay like Kane, you'd have to offer him a long-term contract in order to divide that transfer fee to make it work. But if Manchester United just looked at their books and said, we haven't got that 100 million, they wouldn't have bothered going to the Harry Kane side in the first place. But there's low optimism on Kane, and that's because Daniel Levy, unlike Chelsea and Mason Mount, is expected to almost force Kane to see out his contract and hope that he falls in love with the Ange Postecoglou project, as opposed to allowing a sale now, especially to a Premier League rival. And only Kane can change that. And there's no indication at this point that he will.
Sorry, you just said that, but do you think Kane wants the move?
Well, I think that for Kane, he's got a new option potentially in Real Madrid, which is a complicating factor, because the indication from the Kane camp is that he would be open to a move to Manchester United, and that he wants to stay in the Premier League, and he wants to play Champions League, and he wants to win trophies. Well, Manchester United are in the Champions League and they won a trophy last season. So, of course, from Kane's point of view, much like when he was linked with Manchester City, it's of appeal. But it's whether or not Daniel Levy will do business with the Premier League rival. And Tottenham know from their time negotiating with Levy and signing Dimitar Berbatov how infuriating Levy is to deal with, which again is why they've gone early to see whether this is a serious possibility or a waste of their time. And I think when it was Manchester United, and some say Chelsea simply because of Pochettino, although they've not made any kind of approach, and Bayern, then Manchester United would have been the preferred destination if Kane chose not to stay at Tottenham. But Real Madrid, with Benzema leaving for Al Ittihad, creates a new scenario, and we wait and see whether that's an appeal to Kane. Believe it or not, breaking Alan Shearer's goal-scoring record of 260 Premier League goals is also really important to Kane, which is another reason for him wanting to stay in the Premier League as well. But he's very respectful to Spurs at this point. I know that perhaps he wasn't as much so when Manchester City came calling in the summer of 2021. So now we're going to have to wait and see whether Kane's going to give anybody a helping hand. But as things stand on the Spurs side, they're calm. They've been calm since October. In October, when Antonio Conte was still there, they thought he'd sign a new deal. Now they're a bit more coy on whether he'll put pen to paper imminently, but Levy's position is the same. He's quite happy just to keep Kane playing for the football club, even if that contract runs down. And that's what gives Manchester United low optimism.
Yeah, I mean, Kane, I've always seen it as a tough one to do, but we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, he's a lot of Man United fans' top option. He's an absolutely brilliant striker, but whether it's actually going to happen, I think is a very slim chance in my opinion. But thank you for the update on that. And you know what? Relating it back to Spurs, I don't know if you saw the Jadon Sancho news today that potentially he might be up for sale by Erik ten Hag and could be potentially wanted by Tottenham. Do you see Sancho as a player that could leave Man United this summer?
The Tottenham interest is real for sure. And I'm sure people are putting 2 and 2 together and saying, what about some form of swap deal? Is that any way of offsetting the fee? That's not my understanding. The Tottenham interest, though, is genuine, but there's quite a lot of work for Spurs to do in terms of putting together their recruitment strategy, because Fabio Paratici was obviously banned and subsequently left the club. They don't have a sporting director, and Ange Postecoglou has only just come in. My understanding is that Erik ten Hag was quite prepared to give Sancho time And as a consequence, he's not at the top of the list in terms of outgoings, but money can talk. And I think that 50 or 60 million would be the kind of fee which would give Manchester United a decision to be made, especially if they've got other incomings waiting and they're looking for a fee. So that one is a possibility. Nothing has advanced at this point to my understanding, but the Tottenham interest is genuine for sure. I would also add a couple of European clubs to the list that have looked at Sancho. One is Paris Saint-Germain and the other is Napoli. So there's two clubs there that will both have Champions League football next season that have sent scouts to watch the player and have discussed him internally as well. But Manchester United are not desperate to sell Sancho like other players. So we now have to wait and see whether any of those clubs move and whether the valuation of, I would say, 50 to 60 million from what I understand, gives Manchester United a decision to make. But Ten Hag likes Sancho. He sees him as the right profile, the right age, and he still feels like he has a role to play within the squad.
Well, that's good to clear up, because I think there was a lot of rumours surrounding that Erik ten Hag was like kind of wanting him to leave, and I think it's nice to hear that he obviously is willing to give him time. But a lot of fans would say, you know, maybe it is time to move on. We'll have to see if any good bids do come in for him. But nextly, I wanted to ask you about Napoli defender Min-jae. A lot of Italian reports saying this deal is like nearly done, which I find hard to believe. But then a lot of English reports saying he is on our radar, but it's not close yet. Where do Man United stand on Min-jae? And is a centre-back actually near the top of their list? Because, you know, if Maguire doesn't leave, then it doesn't really open up as much room.
Yeah, of course, Maguire could leave. There's plenty of centre-backs at the club, but Kim is a target for sure. And I think Manchester United have been looking at a centre-back for quite some time, more with knowledge that there will be outgoings in that department. If you look at the squad, as you rightly say now, there's plenty of depth there, but that might not be the case by the first game of next season. Kim's a bit of a strange one because there's an urgency. So you have your priority positions, and I don't think centre-back is exactly top of the list, but you also have the movement of the market. And with Kim, there's a release clause that's only active for the first 2 weeks of the window, and that informs the valuation and gives a variety of suitors the opportunity to get the player. So Napoli's position was always they'd offer Kim a new contract because he hasn't actually been at the club for very long. But Luciano Spalletti's departure has put just a little bit of a complication in that plan. And there's a few Napoli players now that would have stayed if Spalletti had stayed, but now may be open to a move. And remember, when someone triggers a release clause, it doesn't make a transfer a given. And often the release clause is just the valuation yardstick, and then you try and negotiate that number on different terms. But the player still has to buy in and say, yes. Otherwise, if you trigger the clause and the player says, I don't want the clause triggered, then it means absolutely nothing. But the first 2 weeks of the window are going to be quite frantic for Kim, because after that, the release clause comes off the table. And this is why a variety of clubs are moving very quickly. So Manchester United haven't yet got to the point of feeling like this one is definitely a done deal, but they have advanced the situation both on the player side and also internally. And if they are going to trigger the clause, or if they're going to make an offer similar to the clause, then that kind of club-to-club negotiation is not particularly problematic. So I would say Manchester United are one of the front runners for sure. PSG are in the race. To my knowledge, Chelsea are not going to bid, even though some people say that they may hijack it. Chelsea have got plenty of centre-backs, and if Levi Colwill, as expected, stays at Chelsea, then they won't really need to move in that particular area. So I think that Manchester United feel like they're there, and now we wait and see, because it will be a frantic chase for Kim, because once the first 2 weeks of the window pass, then that release clause comes off the table.
Yeah, I mean, that release clause is such a good deal as well. I feel like for a defender of that quality, but it just depends on what situation Manchester United are in that moment of time. But yeah, thank you for that update on that. I think a lot of fans would love to get Min-jae in. It just is, with obviously he said the financial fair play, and obviously there's not a set budget. You think, you know, you're looking at strikers, you're looking at midfielders, you're looking at potentially a goalkeeper. Where does a centre back fit into this if you don't get the sales done? And it'll be interesting for sure. And on that, Harry Maguire, do you know anything about whether his departure is imminent? Does a lot of reports saying he doesn't want to go, but Manchester United are kind of trying to offload him? Any clubs that are interested in him?
Manchester United will offload Harry Maguire if the right offer comes in, but Maguire, as you say, is a little bit more stubborn and would perhaps like to fight for his place in the team. And I think Manchester United really appreciate Eric Ten Hag anyway, appreciates Maguire as a leader, but is quite clearly down the pecking order. And this is where the interest every single window comes from. But we hear all kinds of ridiculous rumours, including a swap deal with Mason Mount going to Manchester United and Maguire going to Chelsea. None of that's true. And a lot of the Maguire speculation in previous windows has been relatively invented as well. So I think the first thing that hasn't happened yet, but will happen, is Eric Ten Hag will meet with Harry Maguire and they'll have a frank and honest discussion. And in that conversation, Ten Hag will listen to Maguire, but will make it very clear that his role is diminishing by the game and by the season at the football club. So if an offer comes in that's acceptable to Manchester United for a full sale in likelihood, they will push and they would like to try and offload him. But from Maguire's point of view, we have to wait and see whether he has that appetite to move to another club. So Newcastle is one to consider. Again, they've got a pretty tried and tested centre-back pairing. Sven Botman has been absolutely brilliant. Fabian
I was
Schär.
going to say, I don't think he'd get into that partnership, if I'm being honest.
He wouldn't, exactly. But maybe, again, he feels like because they've got Champions League football, they're going to have to rotate a bit more and he'll end up being able to play within that kind of team more than at Manchester United. So that's one. I think Tottenham are looking for a centre-back as well, but they've not advanced anything yet on the Maguire front. I think the links with Chelsea are a little bit false as well. I would actually keep an eye on Wolves, by the way, as one dark horse for Maguire. As I've said many times, even though he's not had as good a season this season as he did the season before, Max Kilman is being looked at by a variety of clubs. So Wolves could lose a centre-back and that might open the possibility later in the window for them to look at a player like Maguire as well. So he's on their radar as well. So there's going to be offers for Maguire, 100%. But at this stage, before we can say Manchester United will definitely sell Maguire, Maguire has to have that conversation with Eric Ten Hag. And at the moment, my understanding anyway, is they haven't yet spoken to clarify the situation.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. He's either going to, leave for his own career, which I obviously think would be the best thing for him to do, or he might do a Phil Jones and stick around for the contract. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But I would like Maguire to move on. But yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. It's good to see that there is clubs there willing to maybe go in for him. It's just what money that you would potentially get with him. We'll have to wait and see. But I can see the chat saying, ask about the goalkeeper situation. I don't know if you might follow my thoughts on David De Gea, Ben, but a lot of everyone in the chat will know I'm not a big fan of De Gea. I do think Man United need a new goalkeeper. Do you think De Gea, one, is going to sign this new contract that he's touted to sign? And for two, is a goalkeeper a priority for Eric Ten Hag this summer? Because, he's spoken a lot about not being able to guarantee that number one spot to De Gea.
Well, I think that's the key point. The good news, if you like, for David De Gea, in inverted commas, haters like yourself, is that whether he stays or goes, there's not necessarily a guarantee that he's the number one goalkeeper. And I think that within the talks for him to extend, that has been made abundantly clear. Manchester United need a succession plan for De Gea, and they're either going to bring in someone to compete with him who may become the number one, or alternatively, they are just going to replace him even if he stays. So De Gea will either have to fight for his place should he sign, and even if he maintains that kind of standard, some people say the standard's dropped, of course, but even if he maintains the ability to fight for the number one, there'll be someone there that I think will be pushing him really hard. It's the same, I think, with Newcastle when they brought in Nick Pope before Martin Dubravka was loaned to Manchester United and subsequently then returned to Newcastle. Eddie Howe said exactly the same thing to both goalkeepers. He would not guarantee Dubravka that he would still be the number one. And then Nick Pope came in and obviously started the first game of the season and held his place all season. So Manchester United, I think, are looking for a number one goalkeeper. I don't think they're looking for a number two. I don't think there was ever really a possibility that Henderson would have returned and become the number one. And he's not prepared to come back to Manchester United and be a number two or be given a 50-50 chance, because he feels that there were broken promises prior to going to Nottingham Forest about being the number one that were then kind of revoked by the football club. So Jordan Pickford is one to watch.
And don't tell me that, Ben. Don't tell me that.
That might not go down well. The good news is that it's difficult now, because the understanding with Pickford and Everton was if they went down after signing a new deal, he'd definitely be allowed to leave. But now they've stayed up. I think there's a very realistic possibility that Everton play hardball. The other good news is that Tottenham are looking at Pickford as well. But the fact that they've turned their attention to Raya probably tells you that Pickford is going to be very difficult to prize away from Everton, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think Manchester United want a number one goalkeeper for sure. Andre Onana is a player that Chelsea are expected to advance on. Manchester United, I think, will be priced out of the market there because it's going to take 40-45 million. I don't think they'll quite be looking for that kind of spend either, because there's other priorities. So it's going to be difficult to find a number one goalkeeper. But I think whether De Gea stays or goes, Manchester United are not looking for a number two. They're looking for a David De Gea replacement, whether he stays at the club or whether he leaves the club.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing, because, you were there at the Champions League final, watching Onana and Ederson in goal. It's the different level that you need to be getting to if you want to be competing at the top level. But on that, I know you said our price tag will be priced out of Onana, which is looking at like 45-50 million potentially. We know Diogo Costa has the release clause of 75 million. Last year it was 45. I mean, why didn't we go for it then? It's frustrating. But do you think Man United will definitely be priced out of that Diogo Costa move?
I think that outgoings are going to be important, and I think that if they are going to move at that value, then first of all, De Gea would probably leave the club, get him off the wage bill, get another player off the squad. If De Gea stays and then they prioritise the Mounts and some kind of traditional number 9, suddenly that kind of fee is probably too high within Manchester United's budget. I think that it's a fee of around 75 million euros that is required, which is a huge outlay. And as you say, there was a cheaper opportunity previously. So Manchester United may have missed the boat there. But what we have to bear in mind is that, first of all, Manchester United will clarify the ownership situation. Then they will discover how much leeway, still within financial fair play, there is to maybe spend a bit more. And with the Qatar group in particular, some of the due diligence that they've done is around that creative accounting, because they're well aware of what Chelsea did with amortization, which is not illegal, but the fact that UEFA have shut the loophole on offering long-term contracts and amortizing for longer periods than 5 years tells you that UEFA don't want that type of tactic to be commonplace. But what the 92 Foundation did in the due diligence is work out within quite a tight financial fair play cycle where they might be able to back Erik ten Hag and still not cause themselves problems. So I think it is fair to say that if they come in, they might find a little bit more money, but somewhere down the line, you then have to balance the books or bring in more income or ultimately not spend in a future window. And this is sort of myth about financial fair play, that even when Newcastle United said last season, we're not in Champions League yet, we can't spend a ton of money, the numbers given are never strictly true, because you can always spend more, but you're always window planning. So if Manchester United go to 250 million in the next window, they're not going to get fined or sanctioned. But what it means is within the financial fair play cycle that they're in, come January and come next summer, they may not have enough. So you're constantly working across more than one window with your budgets, which is again why I would never be drawn on a specific budget for a specific window, because the amount you can spend is always higher, but you have to take a calculated risk. Do you want to top load what you can spend into one window because you think it's going to benefit the team, because you think you urgently need that goalkeeper or that Harry Kane, because you think it's going to win you the Champions League? Somewhere down the line, though, it's going to come back to bite you unless you bring in more income. So this is why we should be looking at windows collectively, not just individually. So the money's there, but does it make sense? Or is it going to damage Manchester United when they then want to move in January or next summer or whatever windows fall into particular cycles? And this is why it's much more complicated than just saying can or can't afford. And this is why it's far too superficial to be saying the budget is specifically X, because it's never X. But Manchester United, even if they had a budget of X, wouldn't just spend X. They're looking for value with every deal, not looking just to spend money to a specific number because it's burning a hole in their pocket.
Well, it was like last summer, we all got told the budget was 100 million, and then we went and spent loads at the end of the window. So, it does always change, like you say, I think it's worth the risk well, not worth the risk. I think it's important that we sort out the spine of the team, which is obviously the striker and the goalkeeper. I think that's majorly important, but obviously it depends what Erik ten Hag and the board think about that. And lastly, before we wrap things up, I just want to ask you about, I saw on Sky earlier that obviously we want to go for Mason Mount, but if that doesn't happen, Caicedo is also on Man United's radar. How true is that? Because I thought he was linked to Chelsea and Arsenal quite a lot. I've not really seen him linked to Man United. Is he on Manchester United's radar?
Not to the same degree at this point as Chelsea and Arsenal, but we know that it's a position, again, that Manchester United might look to strengthen in. I think the worry I would have with Caicedo is, again, on value. And this is why Liverpool are not in the race for Caicedo, even though they really like the player. Brighton are going to want a minimum, and this is a minimum. Brighton will never quote the price at this stage, but it is a minimum of 70 million guaranteed plus 10 million in add-ons. So an 80 million package as a minimum starting point. I don't think Caicedo will push 100 million, but it's logical that 80 million all in might become 85, even 90 million all in. And that would be too high for Manchester United, either under the Glazers or new owners, because they want to put that chunk of budget ideally onto a flagship number 9. And then if they bring in a creative-minded midfielder, a centre-back, and potentially a goalkeeper, there definitely wouldn't be the budget for Caicedo as well. So the bad news is that. The good news is that if they were to miss out on Mount or another target, or outgoings add a bit of budget, they might be able to find just a little bit more. But remember before when I spoke about Kane and how the payment terms may be split, and then on the books they can amortize it as well, which helps from an accounting point of view. Unfortunately, with Caicedo, that will not be the case, because whereas Spurs, if a massive offer was tabled and Levy decided to sell, might provide a more preferable payment structure to suitors, Brighton are wanting a massive amount of money up front. And as a consequence, it's going to be really difficult structurally for anybody to get a great deal. And then when you then add the number, it becomes very problematic. So I expect Chelsea to move. I still think that Arsenal could be in the race, but Declan Rice is their priority. With Manchester United, we have to wait and see. But at this stage, it's a very high number. And I think if Manchester United are going to spend that kind of number, then I'd expect them to be putting it on that traditional number 9 above a number 6.
I can assume it's the same with Rice. The same with Rice in that situation. He's probably more likely to go to Arsenal.
I just think Manchester United and Rice has always been a bit of a myth in many ways. Of course, people appreciate Rice. Of course, clubs explore the deal. But as I've said many times, Rice ideally wants to stay in London. He's spoken glowingly about both Arsenal and Mikel Arteta. We know that Arsenal are going to push. We know they want to table a bid as soon as possible now the Europa Conference League final that West Ham won is out the way. And the only way you're going to complicate things is by giving West Ham a number that exceeds what Arsenal are prepared to pay, which is effectively structurally anyway what Chelsea were able to do with the Mykhailo Mudryk deal. And Manchester United won't want to get in a bidding war for Declan Rice. So when they looked at Rice, the valuation Manchester United felt they might get him for, now granted West Ham were in a relegation battle at the time, but it was about £75 million, 75 million to 80 million total package. Now Rice is going to be pushing 100 million. Arsenal want to get him for under 100 million, but maybe it's going to be over 100 million. We have to wait and see. It depends how many suitors there are and how bullish West Ham are on their valuation. And the more suitors, the more bullish they'll be. So I think Manchester United are not at this point advancing in a club-to-club sense on Declan Rice because of that valuation and because virtually everybody feels now, even Bayern Munich and Thomas Tuchel, who are also a suitor, that Arsenal, they're heavy favourites.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that coming from a mile off. I'm a fan of Rice. A lot of people, think he's overrated. English is the term that likes to be thrown around a lot, but I think he's a very, very good player. And I think Arsenal are getting a good player in that deal. And I do expect him to go there. But I mean, a lot of United fans that were expecting Man United to go for Rice, I'm sure that little update there will make them think otherwise, which is a good thing. The clarity is exactly what we want from this. And lastly, because I can see the comments, I've said lastly like the last 3 times now. Such a good interview, Ben. Sorry, I'll let you go in a second. Lastly, Højlund of Atalanta. Anything that you know on that situation?
Yeah, really good player and somebody with sky-high potential. Definitely on Manchester United's list. And because of the age, only 20 years of age, a smaller fee certainly than the likes, for example, of Harry Kane or Victor Osimhen, another player that we haven't mentioned. Maybe if you want a last question, we can talk about him as well. But I think that Rasmus Højlund is going to be one to watch for Manchester United. There's definitely been contact that has already been made on the player side, and there's been talks as well with Atalanta to kind of understand the terms of the deal. And this would be perfect for Manchester United, because not only do they get a player with a sky-high potential who could be a big player in the future, but they get someone they can throw straight into the Premier League at a young age. I think it was 9 goals in Serie A in just over 32 games last season for Atalanta. He chips in with a couple of assists as well. He's fast, he's physical, he's intelligent, and this is effectively why people are comparing him or referring to him as being a player with the same kind of qualities, if you like, as Erling Haaland. Haaland is more developed. He's got more of a goal-scoring pedigree, and Højlund has played far less games as well. I mean, he's only been at Atalanta for 1 season, let's not forget, and he was at Sturm Graz before that too. And I don't think he's ever got into double figures in terms of his league goal-scoring. So I don't think that Rasmus Højlund would be Manchester United's only purchase as far as a forward is concerned, because he's not necessarily that drop in, score 15 plus or 20 plus goals. He's probably more a sign, develop, integrate, get 6 or 7, then the following season or the season after that, start trying to hit double figures a little bit more regularly. But the beauty of Højlund is the potential and the price compared to some of these other names that we've been mentioning. Osimhen, who we may speak about, Kane, Dusan Vlahovic as well, who's another player that Manchester United are looking at too. So this one has legs for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Højlund, I really like the look of him, but what we don't want to do is do what we did with previous targets. I mean, Haaland's even one of them, where we were on the brink of signing them and then we let them go, and then they end up becoming, a £100 million player that we can't get our hands on. So Højlund would be definitely a wise move. And you know what? I'll put in a request for the last question on Osimhen. What did you want to What did you have to update us on Osimhen then? Because I feel like that has gone really quiet actually.
Yeah, I mean, Napoli have been clear they don't want to sell. But again, Spalletti's gone. And Victor Osimhen, unlike Kvaradona, as he's known, who's another player that Manchester City and Newcastle have looked at, and even Kim, he's been at the club for longer. So if you ask the Osimhen camp, absolutely wants to play in the Premier League and is open to offers at least. But if you ask Napoli, they're adamant that they won't want to sell. But I think the thing to reiterate about Osimhen when people speak of him being available in inverted commas for crazy money is, don't forget what Napoli paid, which was a total package of 80 million euros. And that's inclusive of the fee, player trade and bonuses, which have now been activated. So their total valuation that they paid to Lille was 80 million euros. So anyone that tells you it's going to be 90 million, it's going to be 100 million euros, way off the mark. Napoli want, if they can get it, close to double what they paid if they're to entertain a sale. And they'll only entertain a sale if Osimhen says, I want to go. And Manchester United have got history with Osimhen because they approached him in the past, but he didn't think that he was going to get any playing time. And actually, it was during a period when Ighalo was at the club, and he knows Ighalo really well. And he spoke to Ighalo and effectively got a glowing review of the football club. And he thought, wow, Manchester United. But he didn't join because he looked at the pecking order, including a player like Ighalo, and said, well, If he's there and is only getting a certain amount of game time, and then I come in and I'm young, then how am I going to be able to play? So he moved to Napoli instead. So Victor Osimhen has always had a bit of a soft spot for Manchester United. The timing just wasn't right historically. Now it may be a different story as far as the player's concerned, but Manchester United have got to find that money, and that's what makes Osimhen to Manchester United less likely.
Wow, that's crazy. Double what they paid is I mean, I was thinking around the 120 mil mark, but probably even more than that from what you're saying. And to think we could have been wearing a United shirt right now and probably definitely would have been playing up front. So little deals like this that we miss out on, it's so frustrating, but hopefully things will start to progress. We'll get some good signings in, and with the new ownership, when it does finally happen, and I'm sure you'll be one of the first to get onto that, when it does finally happen, we can start progressing and making different decisions, more positive decisions in the football club. But look, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. Obviously, your debut on the United Stand YouTube, and what a great interview it was. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight. And obviously, we'll be hoping to get you back on soon, maybe even in the studio.
Yeah, happy to. I think people are bored by the ownership situation. And look, I appreciate when you hear the reporting. It's a lot of information. It's complex, and people just want black and white. They want to know who's going to win, when are they going to win, and when are they going to get in, and then who are they going to buy. And I understand that, but I do think that takeovers are complicated. So as much as you might hate listening to these long answers that give you analysis and context, this is how a takeover works. And if you jump the gun and just stick out a Qatari flag or whatever emoji you want to associate with Sir Jim Ratcliffe and then hope it's done, you're missing the finesse of how things actually work. And how many times have we thought it's going one way and then it's changed? So I'm always a little bit cautious, but hopefully we can stop talking about takeovers and we can start talking about Manchester United next season playing in the Champions League. And we can do that within a week or two when we get clarity on the ownership situation.
I like the way you're talking there, Ben. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you to all the viewers as well. We literally held strong there on, I think it was nearly 15,000 throughout the whole interview. So thank you everyone for staying and watching Ben give us that really good insight. And thank you for all the positive comments, all the insightful comments. And make sure you hit a like on the video on your way out as well. And comment down below what other interviews we should have on. But Ben, thank you for your first time on the United Stand. You'll be back, I'm sure. And have a nice day as well. And hopefully we have some insight throughout the week. See you later.
All the best, everyone.